There is a moment in most people's financial lives that feels like progress. Income increases, responsibilities grow, and the rewards of work begin to appear in visible ways. A slightly better apartment replaces a modest one. The older car is traded for something newer. Dinners become more frequent at restaurants instead of at home, and small luxuries quietly move from occasional treats to normal parts of everyday life. Nothing about these changes appears irrational. In fact, they often feel like the natural outcome of working harder and moving forward. Yet beneath these seemingly harmless upgrades lies a subtle mathematical shift that quietly changes the entire trajectory of a person's financial future. Lifestyle inflation is rarely a dramatic event. It does not arrive suddenly with a large purchase or a reckless decision. Instead, it develops gradually through a series of small adjustments that feel justified at each step. When income rises by 20%, increasing spending by a similar amount feels reasonable. The logic seems simple. If more money is coming in, slightly more money can go out. But the mathematical structure behind wealth accumulation tells a different story. Because the variable that truly shapes financial growth is not income alone. It's the gap between income and spending and the rate at which that gap expands over time. To understand this, imagine two individuals whose careers follow nearly identical paths. Both begin their working lives earning modest salaries, and both experience steady income growth as their skills develop. Over the course of 10 years, their salaries gradually rise from $50,000 to $100,000. On paper, their financial progress appears identical, yet their outcomes diverge dramatically depending on how their spending evolves alongside that income. The first individual allows spending to rise almost perfectly with income. When salary increases, rent increases as well. Transportation becomes more expensive. Vacations grow slightly more elaborate. Monthly subscriptions expand. Nothing feels excessive in isolation, and the lifestyle remains within reasonable limits, but the spending curve quietly mirrors the income curve. As a result, the amount left over for saving and investing remains relatively small throughout the entire decade. The second individual approaches rising income differently. Their lifestyle improves slowly, but not at the same pace as their earnings. When salary increases, they allow spending to rise slightly, but they deliberately preserve a widening gap between what they earn and what they spend. Over time, this gap becomes increasingly meaningful because the surplus is not simply stored away. It is invested, and those investments begin to produce returns that compound over the years. Mathematically, the difference between these two paths becomes profound. If the first individual saves 5% of their income each year, while the second saves 20%, the gap in invested capital grows much faster than the difference in income itself. Even though both individuals earn the same salaries, the compounding effect on their invested savings creates a widening financial distance between them. After 20 years, the second individual may possess several times more accumulated capital despite having lived on only slightly less each year. This outcome emerges from a simple principle. Compounding amplifies early financial behavior. Small differences in savings rates create disproportionately large differences in long-term wealth because invested money does not grow in a straight line. It grows exponentially, with each year's returns generating additional returns in the future. Lifestyle inflation disrupts this process because it consumes the very surplus that would otherwise enter the compounding cycle. Behavioral economics offers insight into why lifestyle inflation is so common. Human perception of progress tends to be relative rather than absolute. When people earn more money, they naturally compare their lifestyle to peers with similar incomes. This comparison creates a shifting reference point. A person who once felt satisfied with modest living conditions may begin to feel constrained when surrounded by others whose lifestyles reflect higher earnings. Without conscious intention, spending adapts to match these new social expectations. Another psychological factor is hedonic adaptation, the tendency for humans to quickly become accustomed to improvements in comfort or convenience. The excitement of a new purchase fades faster than expected, which gradually resets the baseline for what feels normal. Over time, experiences that once felt luxurious begin to feel ordinary, and maintaining satisfaction requires additional upgrades. This process subtly elevates consumer expectations. Encourages spending to rise with income, even when those increases do not meaningfully improve long-term well-being. Historically, economists have observed similar patterns at larger scales. During periods of economic expansion, household consumption tends to rise quickly as wages increase. While this spending stimulates economic activity, it often leaves many households with limited financial buffers when conditions change. The financial crises of past decades revealed how fragile many personal balance sheets can become when rising incomes are accompanied by rising obligations. Lifestyle inflation therefore operates not only as a personal financial pattern, but also as a systemic behavior embedded within modern economies. Advertising, social norms, and easy access to credit all reinforce the idea that higher income should translate into visibly higher consumption. Yet the mathematical consequences remain the same regardless of cultural context. When spending rises in lockstep with income, the potential for compounding wealth is reduced. The key insight is that wealth is not primarily a function of how much money flows through a person's life. Instead, it is determined by how much of that flow is preserved and allowed to compound over time. Two individuals can earn identical incomes and live in the same city, yet their long-term financial outcomes may diverge dramatically based on how lifestyle inflation shapes their spending patterns. Recognizing this dynamic often creates a quiet psychological shift. Instead of viewing income growth solely as an opportunity to upgrade lifestyle, it begins to appear as an opportunity to expand financial margin. Each raise becomes a decision point. Should this additional income permanently increase monthly obligations, or should part of it widen the gap between earnings and expenses? The answer to that question gradually determines whether rising income produces temporary comfort or long-term financial resilience. Over the span of decades, this seemingly small behavioral distinction becomes mathematically powerful. Compounding rewards patience and consistency far more than dramatic financial moves. A modest lifestyle that grows slowly while income rises steadily can generate large accumulations of capital without requiring extreme frugality or extraordinary investment skill. The mathematics simply favors those who allow surplus to persist and compound, rather than disappear into gradually expanding consumption. Lifestyle inflation is therefore not inherently a mistake. Improving one's quality of life is a natural and often meaningful outcome of hard work. The underlying issue arises when spending expands automatically, without awareness of the mathematical trade-offs involved. When every increase in income is matched by an equivalent increase in expenses, the long-term growth potential of that income quietly disappears. Understanding the math behind lifestyle inflation reveals that financial progress is shaped less by dramatic events and more by steady patterns repeated over time. Small choices about how income growth is absorbed into daily life accumulate quietly in the background, influencing the future in ways that may not be immediately visible. The difference between spending slightly less than one earns and spending nearly everything may appear minor in the present, yet over many years that difference compounds into entirely different financial landscapes. In this sense, lifestyle inflation is not simply about spending habits. It is about the invisible mathematical structure that connects today's decisions with tomorrow's possibilities. When income rises, the real question is not how much life can expand to fill that income, but how much space can be preserved for the quiet exponential force of compounding to work over time.